Welcome to the almighty Photoshop. This program has been around for ages, but I think of all the programs I've tried, I've only tried one other, and I think it was Clip Studio. It wasn't mine, but I tried it a little bit. I feel like I just felt like Photoshop was the most familiar and comfortable for me because I got my start with digital art on Photoshop when I first took my first animation class in high school. And my teacher told us to use Photoshop to animate a ball bouncing. And boy, was that learning curve huge. So I will save you that trouble and tell you a little bit about the functions that Photoshop has so you know how to use the program when I'm teaching the course. So my version is the 2015 Photoshop. But if you have the Adobe Creative Cloud, it'll probably be Adobe 2021, 2022. The tools are pretty similar. They just have like more advanced stuff. I think in particular with like the wand, I think it has an extra magic select where it saves you a whole bunch of time by selecting your figure against the background, that kind of stuff. But we will not be using that particular function because that would be usually targeted for photograph editing functions rather than for painting. So before I overwhelm you with anything, let's just teach you how to create a new canvas, right? So I'm just going into File. You can see right on top here, it says Control New. So if you ever wanted a shortcut, you can see right here, Control New, Control N. And now when it pops up, it's going to let you name it. It's going to tell you whether you want to have the defaults, what kind of size you want. I usually leave the sizes in pixels rather than in inches or centimeters because that's just a lot easier for me to imagine like the image quality. And so typically for a good size, I would say around 3000 to like 4000-ish ratio is great for just a normal canvas. And then resolution, I think this starts out with 72, but 72 is not great if you're trying to print the image that you're trying to do. So usually designers, when they design stuff on Photoshop, they go for 300. So I just set that as like a DPI default. But of course, that also means the file size is going to be a little bit bigger. So keep in mind with a higher pixels per inch, it just means for every little square inch that you're zooming into, there's a lot more pixels. So even if your size is like 3000 to 4200, the resolution might be really good. So this next thing right here is the color mode. And so right here, you get to select whether you want grayscale, RGB, CMYK, lab, or bitmap. And so for our functions, typically we're only looking at RGB and CMYK. RGB color is intended for images that will be mostly viewed on screens, right? So all the colors are going to be based on a color wheel that mixes colors through adding red, green, and blue. And so the colors tend to be a lot more vibrant, a lot more saturated than whereas say CMYK, which is the same name as the types of ink that your printer has, cyan, magenta, yellow, don't know what K means, but just know that this is referring to the types of ink that is found in your regular printer. And so this color mode mixes colors using the same kind of ink mixing that the printer does. And so it makes when you're printing it out, when you're like sending it out to like a print shop, they're able to perfectly color match the colors that you have in your illustration to the types of ink that they can print. So if you were to say send out a RGB color index to print, it still will look good, but there may be some colors that are not quite the same just because the printer doesn't know how to mix that color as it does in RGB. And so that's the thing you have to make in consideration when you're creating your works, whether or not you're only doing this to post online or whether or not you want to later on print this, because you can always change the color mode later on. So don't worry about that. And then for background, you get to choose a color. Say I want to choose this medium gray as my background. And then color, I usually don't color manage because then it gets too complicated in how the program messes around with your stuff. I don't worry about that. I just leave it as is. And then I press OK. And then you see you have your very own canvas, right? So I'm just going to zoom in. And zooming in is typically Control plus, or I think on the Mac, it's Command plus. Regardless, Same idea for zooming out, Control minus, Command minus. And then if you want the canvas to fit perfectly on your screen, it's Control 0. So you see this nice perfect border where you can see every single little thing, right? Now, let's go over the layers. So you're going to see that you have this window for colors and swatches. Swatches, it just gives you like a lot of the common colors that you use. I think you can add colors that you commonly use, but let's not worry about that right now. Let's just know that this is an option for you once you get later in your journey. Just know this is basically what it is. Color, you can shrink it, stretch it. I like to do it in the middle so it's not too overwhelming. You're not seeing a million options like, oh, I see this minute little change in my brow and oh, I need it to be slightly lighter. That's a little too hardcore for me. I'm just gonna leave it to good size. You can see all the colors. You can see it gets more saturated, that kind of stuff. Right under it, you're gonna see 3 little tabs. One of the tabs that you're gonna use the most is called layers. And so this layer, this icon right here means it's locked. That means it's the background and like the most bottommost layer. And so you cannot do any of these options. You can't do a blending mode. You can't do this. So the way you do it, you unlock it. Simple as that, right? And so that means now you can lock it, you can change it to darker color, change different modes, that kind of stuff. Now, how do you add more layers to it? Because layers are going to become your best friend, especially when you're painting digitally. This is the thing that all digital artists love because you don't want to mess up what you did before, but you want to try something out. Say I drew an apple. A really pretty apple with a stem, right? Now, I don't know if I want to add a leaf or not. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna add a layer. This layer is transparent right now. There's nothing on it. So that means you can do a happy face and it's gonna eventually show up. And how do you know that this is transparent? Because if you look on the viewfinder, immediately you see there's a huge line there, right? So say I want to do a leaf, right? I'm trying to feel out the water, see if I like in that leaf. Maybe I don't like it. I draw a leaf. I think the leaf is too close to the stem, so what do? Power of layers. I can erase without touching the layers underneath. God, I love layers. All right, so now let's say if we lock this layer, right? I press this particular button right here. That's a checkerboard, like a chessboard kind of thing. Oh, look, nothing's happened. Well, that's because when you press this layer, that means you are locking it so you're only painting on the stuff that you've painted before. See? So that makes it so much easier for you to not paint outside the lines. Because say if I were to paint this by hand, right? Oh God, look at it, it's out of line. I have to go back and erase it. But thank God there's this, right? Okay, now say, let's paint this leaf again. Now, what does this button do? Layers locked, that means it will not let you paint anymore, right? It prevents you from accidentally painting on this layer, ever so accidentally. This means that you can't move the layer around. It's locking it. I don't remember what this one is, but I don't usually use it. This one is just lock it, like the previous, right? You can't do anything to it. Can't do anything. It's locked. Basically, throw away the key, can't do anything. So that's what those are. And as for these labels here, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Opacity refers to the opacity of the layer. That means everything on the layer is that, not just this. So if I were to draw a happy face, I can reduce the happy face all the way, or I can bring it back. And then fill is a similar idea. It acts pretty much similarly to opacity because it just means like, oh, how much are you going to fill that layer with the colors that you've done? So I think if you just know opacity, honestly, it does the same. Now, let's say you want to know a little bit about the tools here. Let's talk about the tools on the left side. So if you one day accidentally, oops, where did my tools go? Don't worry, you did not just ruin your whole day. I have done this multiple times. Don't worry, just go back into your tools. Tools, there we go. You have to scroll all the way down. If you're like me and you can't find things because you're blind, don't worry. reset essentials, and voila, you're back to normal. Now, I had previously customized my things, and so I'm going to close this tab group because I don't like that. I'm going to stretch this back out to my original size. And so the default gives you history and it gives you properties. Now, while this is helpful for when you make those boo-boos, I like to have more things on my window. So I usually typically like to include brushes. I also like to include a navigator, because why would you not do this for yourself? Let you zoom out, see how the overall picture is looking, right? I also typically like my tool presets. I have some extra tools in here. I don't always use them, but sometimes they're helpful. And then I like to I sometimes do paragraph because I add in text, but just so you know, this is how you would customize your sidebar. You just go through, add whatever feels right to you. History, that's the history. So if you ever accidentally lose something, say you drag it out, accidentally close it, just go back to window, and then just drag it back into this little spot, right? You can move it to your heart's content. Now, as for what this toolbar right here, what these things are doing, this is your move around button. So there's nothing on there, but let me draw that leaf again, so you have something to see while we are moving it around. So the move around, self-explanatory moves. This is called a marquee, and it basically allows you to select, and if you want to transform or move this around, just press and move it around. Now, to deselect it, you press Ctrl D. You can change the shape of the marquee. You can do it as a circle, and to create a perfect circle, you just hold down Shift. You can also do a tiny row like this. Not that anyone really uses it. You can also do a vertical row. And the way I'm selecting these, I'm pressing the right mouse button to see more options. And on your tablet pen, that's usually the up. You can link your right mouse button to your buttons on your pen tablet, right? I would follow the instructions on your particular model of your pen tablet in order to know how to do it. Right now I'm using a Huion H610X, and it's like a very basic model where it's about paper sized. It's very lightweight. It has a wireless pen tool that comes with the button, and I have linked my top button to my right mouse button, so I'm able to do things like this, right? So I can right click. Now this here, the lasso tool, so useful for getting that clean edge, because your brush can only do oh so far. So whereas this is the brush, this is the lasso. See? I can select it all, backspace, delete it. So they have some options. They have a polygonal lasso tool where it basically allows you to get super straight edges. And again, if you're holding down Shift, you get super straight lines that are going up or across, that kind of thing. And then the other one is the one that typically is super helpful if you have some non-straight forms, like organic forms. So say you have an apple, it's gonna follow the curve of the apple. Check it out. Check out the apple. Now you can refine your lasso by playing around with these numbers up here. I've messed around with it, and I feel like the higher the number it is, the more tightly it is, the lasso it does. I might be wrong, but I think it should work if you have about 80-ish frequency, usually. It's pretty close to following the shape. This is the wand, and this is where you get to select a particular color. So you can get to choose. You can either choose point sample, so it's going to choose all the similar colors. 3x3 is like the width where it's choosing the selection. And then all these others are also the same idea where it's like, oh, the square by this many pixels is going to choose those colors, right? Tolerance is also referring to how tightly it follows those colors and how much it'll seek it. And I think you don't want it too high, because then it'll start seeking every single other color around it. So just around 30s, 20s is a good compromise. This one is the crop. So hold a sec, let me get out of that. Deselect. Crop is basically how you change the size of your canvas. Say, oh, I'm not feeling it, it's too much space. So I just shrunk my whole canvas. right? You can even choose particular ratios. You can choose, I want a ratio of 5:7, right? It's gonna only do cropping in that ratio. It's not gonna let you do any other ones. And then you clear it through here. You can also choose the default ratios where it's like 4:5, 2:3. It's kind of weird. But regardless, if you're not liking it, just clear it, get out of there. And what I just did was I pressed Control Alt Z. Now, here's the important distinction between Control Z and Control Alt Z. So Control Z is only going to do undo state change once. So say I did 2 marks, right? If I do Control Z, it'll get rid of 1. But if you do Control Z again, it'll go back forward because it doesn't register that you're trying to go back in the history. So you have to do Control Alt Z if you want to get rid of both marks. Let's go back to eye picker. So the eyedrop tool is basically how you choose your colors if you don't remember what color you chose. I honestly don't remember the colors I've chosen. I just remember approximate. But if you're trying to get the exact color, you gotta use the eyedropper too. There's a lot of other tools here that I don't typically use, but tends to be sort of helpful if you're getting more advanced into your Photoshop career. Spot healing, all of these still very advanced for photograph editing. We won't be using in this class. And then our brushes, our beautiful brushes. Once you select this, you're able to paint, basically. And the way you choose what brushes you do is you right click and then you'll get to see all your different options. You're gonna come with like the default of the soft brush, the soft brush with pressure, I think, and then a hard brush, I believe. Yeah, basically, it's like the really default. I'm gonna also teach you how to download my brushes because you see I have a lot of brushes that were not from the default. And so if you go to, you're gonna go to this link, the one that was provided to you when you purchased this course. It's gonna say my collection of brushes. It's a Google Drive link, and you're gonna download this file. And then once it's downloaded, you're gonna unzip everything, extract it into a folder. Then once you're back in Photoshop, we're gonna go to our brushes sections, right? There's a little 3 lines right here, and you're gonna say load brushes. And you're gonna go to that file with the brushes, and it should look like this kind of file. And you're gonna say load, and then it should add all the brushes into your thing. And then you can go through the list that I provided also on the document to select and delete the ones that you don't want or keep, up to you. Like this brush, maybe I don't like this brush as much, so I'm just gonna delete it, right? Get rid of it. Don't waste space so you don't have to keep looking for the brush that you want. And so I will say that number 40, which is called a watercolor loaded wet flat tip one, and it's the 40 brush, it looks like this, is my absolute favorite. It has the function of opacity, right? Do it lighter, do it harder, and it has this really cool kind of mixing effect and this really cool brush texture, which makes it really nice for creating those edges if you're, say, doing something like that, right? So that's the brushes. Stamp tool, we don't really use. Eraser is just E. This is the blur tool, the sharpen tool, and the smudge tool. So as the names read it, this blurs, sharpens, and smudges. And so the smudging tool gonna take a little bit for your computer to work around because the way it works, it's like it moves the color around. And I also have the strength on really low because you never want the smudge to go crazy, because if it's like this, you see how the color kind of moves like, ooh, like crazy. So we're not gonna do that to ourselves. We're gonna keep our smudge tool relatively low. So it just does a slight mixing, as if you were to paint in traditional with your brush or your hand, you would smudge the color a little bit. Dodge tool is the almighty one where it basically, you can choose whether you want to target the highlights, midtones, or shadows, but it just brightens everything in saturation and in brightness. So if you've ever watched Ross Draws, This is the function that he uses a lot. Of course, you have to use it sparingly. Don't use it too much. Pen tool, we don't really use. Text is for if you wanted to type something. ASDFG. You can choose your fonts here, size, etc. And the thing is, when you create a text tool, say I did that, right? This creates a text layer, so you can re-edit it by double-clicking that button. Now, let's say you wanted to paint over it, right? You have to rasterize type and change it back to a regular paint layer. Then you're able to do this, because otherwise, you're not able to paint on it, right? We have the line tool where you have the rectangle, all these different shapes. You can play around with it. The line tool is really great if you wanted to do straight lines like this, especially if you're like doing checkerboards or like hashtags. Well, no one I know would ever do a hashtag using this line, right? But if you're doing like the sketch line or something like that, there you go. And then this one is just the hand tool and then the zoom. And right here is where you choose your colors. So if you press this button right here, it's going to pop up a window that allows you to choose a color. And it's going to do that. Now, if you press this little 2 ringed arrow right here, the 2 snaked arrow, it just switches the colors. And you can do the same thing by pressing X, switches the colors. Now, the keyboard shortcuts I told you may not be the same for you. And in which case, you're just going to go to edit, and then go to keyboard shortcut. And then you can assign the correct name that you want for your tools. I just changed up, I believe, the eye picker to A. I dropped tool to A. If you do applications, panel menu, switch, all those things. You can take your time to go through them if you really wish to, like, I need my lasso to not be the letter L, because who wants an L for the lasso tool? I don't know. Maybe you like the letter R for some reason for it. Whatever suits your fancy, you have the prerogative, you have the privilege to make your decision and choice. Just keep in mind to not have too many duplicate letters, or else you're going to get really confused and really annoyed every time you press a letter and you're trying to do one tool but it does another. And so, some of the other windows here are image. Here's where you would change the mode that we were talking about. Adjustments is where you play around with all these little functions, and they're pretty self-explanatory. Brightness and contrast just talks about how bright your particular layer is going to be, whether you want to up the contrast being how stark the difference between the light and dark is. Levels is something that I still have yet to figure out. I just typically end up playing around with random stuff. I just mess around with the numbers, and whatever looks right, I do it. Then we also have curves, which is pretty similar, but it just focuses more on like the colors and stuff. Vibrance, hue, saturation, color. All these are layers functions that I can go more into as we work, because there may not be a need for you to use all of these functions, but it's always worth playing around with it if you're interested in knowing more about the different adjustment layers. Image size is where it's kind of important. What did it say you wanted to increase the size of your canvas, right? I decided I want to work bigger because I want to get into the details. Well, here's the catch. Because you worked in 3000 by 4000 and you suddenly decided you want to add more pixels to it, it's going to look blurry. Because previously you only had 3000 pixels, and now that you increased it, Photoshop isn't sure how to add those pixels, and so they just add it to its best of its ability, and as a result you get these kind of fuzzy edges that wouldn't have happened if you had started out working bigger rather than smaller. And so my tip is usually I rather work bigger than smaller, because you can always reduce the size and compress the image, but you can't add more pixels, right? I'll talk a little bit more about my workflow and some tips I would have for some good digital art tips, right? When you're working, you should always have a habit of pressing the Control-Shift-S whenever you're working. That is save. Save as, okay? And then if you press Control-S, it's just regular save. And so whenever you're working, every couple of minutes, just press that save button, you know? It's much more efficient to waste your time pressing that save button rather than worrying if you ever have a power outage on like one summer day because they're being dumb and everyone's turning on their AC and the power gets cut and your computer shuts down, and then what happens? You lose the progress, right? So you want to make sure that you're always constantly saving, so it ensures that your most recent work was kept and you don't have to go all the way back to your first stages and you lose all your progress. Okay, so it finally loaded, but you can see because you just increase the size of the canvas, compare, right? This has more pixels. This is Photoshop not being able to understand how to add those pixels. Maybe it'll be easier if you see it like this. Like something about this being clearer than this, right? And so that is why we do not increase sizes. And I guess some other tips I would have: always make sure if you're not sure about something that you want to add, I would just bust it up onto another layer, say here, because worst comes to worst, you just delete that layer and you wouldn't have ruined your work. But obviously you can't do that for every single choice that you make, because sometimes there are situations where you want to mix colors, in which case it's better to work like that, work on the same layer, right? It forces you to think more like a traditional painter rather than a digital painter. But a good practice is to try to mix the two kind of lines of thinking. And so some other tools that I will go over is histogram. It just tells you like how much color you're using in each thing. Properties, brush presets. This is where you can mess around and change how your brush works. Scattering is just refers to how much your brush will like vary in its texture. I don't think texture really does too much unless you're like going crazy with these functions. Dual brush, I don't really use. Color dynamics, it does this weird thing where it sort of mixes the two colors that you have chosen here, but it's not successful all the time. So hue jitter, see, it does this like weird thing. It might be a cool effect, but I personally don't really use it because I like to have clean colors that I can control. But it might be a fun exercise to try to do something where you can't control it and then you work from there, you know? Transfer just refers to the opacity and stuff. So that's why you would have, say, like this kind of opacity transfer. Build up also similar, smoothing similar. Wet edges is also, you see, compare that. It's like just slightly different. Like it's not no more of the uneven kind of color distribution. You get instead this even all around super wet stuff. Let me go over the different types of layer styles. And so normal, as you can tell, it means normal. Let me do this real fun. Let's do some color theory real quick. Let's bust out a red. And then let me drop down a nice blue bird, right? Give the bird some eyes. Give it a beak. Bird's gotta be pudgy because where are its wings, right? And then we gotta give it some legs. Okay. All right, so we have this orange background and this blue bird. So this is on normal for the bird. Watch what it happens when I do this. So dissolve, it basically does kind of a dissolve effect. Now if we were to do, say, let me move this bird down a little bit so you can see it better. All right, perfect. Now, if we were to do multiply, it basically takes all this color and darkens the color on the back. If we do darken, it just darkens, but it doesn't consider the color on the back. Linear burn, darker color. Lighten, screen, color dodge, linear dodge, lighter color, overlay. You get the idea. So the idea is you just play around with the different layer styles and you'll figure out stuff about it. Say like with vivid light or hard light, it basically treats this as like a super vibrant kind of light on top of the back layer. Whereas overlay, it just does a very more subtle, saturated kind of light. versus linear dodge where it's like, ooh, exposure to the max, right? Just subtle differences that you'll pick up as you work, and you just play around with whatever effects happens, because honestly, most of the time the colors, not all the time they're going to be perfectly understood. So I like to just see what works and see whether it fits my fancy. I mean, that's kind of the fun of like experimenting and playing around with the functions, right? Always having a little surprise. And then I can talk a little bit more about filters, because filters I use quite a bit. So Liquify is my bread and butter. It'll pop up a little window here where you can mess around this bird like crazy. So this top one allows you to just randomly move that bird as you wish. See? You can go back on your choices similar to in the regular Photoshop. You just press Ctrl-Alt-Z. This one, as the picture shows you, it shrinks everything. So let's say I do this. Ooh, that bird just got shrunk. And as this picture shows, this bird gonna get big, right? And it starts from the very center and expands out exponentially like that. And you can play around with the pressures and stuff, but I usually don't mess around with it too much because I feel like it doesn't really change the effect too much. And then some other filters I typically use blur, box blur, Gaussian blur, lens blur, motion blur. Motion blur is really good if you want to mimic things in motion. I like to do these typically for shrubbery, for hair, or for like clothes that are moving. Gaussian blur, lens blur, they're great for creating that effect of depth. Radial blur, it pretends it's like a whole circle and then it blurs in that motion. And then there's some other blurs that are really intensive for your computer, and it's really specific in the way it blurs. And so I don't typically use it for my artwork, but if you do photography, it can come helpful, you know? And then they give you some more options. Iris blur, which is how you get the whole camera all around a kind of pupil shaped eye kind of blur. Distort gives you some texture. Noise gives you some texture. Pixelate also gives you some cool kind of textures where you might do a glitch effect kind of thing. Render allows you to do these types of natural filters, but I don't use it too much because I like to control how I want my clouds. Sharpen, stylize, etc. 3D I don't do much with. I don't think I have even the function for it. And then that's just about it. So we basically gone through most of the basic functions of Photoshop, and I've taught you how to add the brushes from the link into your own Photoshop. So when I do start teaching you how to paint a face or how to paint a whole character or fur, you're going to be able to follow along with the types of brushes that I'm using to imitate the textures, right? And so I hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the next lesson. Bye!